All right, welcome back to Train Signal, and you're watching Give Your People What They Want service. So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about creating highly available solutions with network load balancing, specifically with terminal services, just so you know. But I also want to show you how to capture an image for duplicating machines for network load balancing or clustering. So I think this is going to be some very specific real world useful skills I think you're really going to need, especially as you continue to deploy servers and as your network grows. You need to be able to scale it up. All right, so I'm going to be teaching you how to do that. So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you first of all about the big three in terms of highly available solutions. I'm going to tell you about the three primary ways that you can create highly available fault tolerant solutions. All right, then I'm going to show you how to build and deploy a deployment services image to create duplicate machines so you can make the big three work. I know that's probably like the longest title for a video segment ever, but I wanted to make sure it was very descriptive. And then I'm going to show you how to turn around and implement terminal services load balancing with TS Session Broker. So this is really going to be a packed video. Let's go ahead and get into it here. And we start off here with Hank being concerned that the terminal services machine that he has set up for all that reporting stuff, you remember, it might fail in the most critical of times. Now, he is adamant that you do whatever you need to so that he and the other sales staff have access to the Office-based report writing software as close to 100% of the time as possible. Now, here's our three options that we have, the big three, if you will. We're starting off with network load balancing, and basically all this really does is distributes workload to different machines to alleviate stress on those machines and provide high scalability. So that means you can actually add more servers quickly and easily so that you can have as close to 100% of efficiency as you can. You want your users to have a good experience, and when you have more servers doing the same job, that's really going to aid in their experience. Now, this is really best for web-based stuff, although it does have other applications. I'm talking about the other one, failover clustering. Now, this is where multiple machines act like one machine, okay, for high availability in case one machine fails. So let's say you have three machines, all right, all doing the same job, and one of them decides to completely blow up that one particular day for no good reason. Well, it's okay because in a failover cluster, you have at least one other machine, if not two or three, who can deliver the same service. All right, so there's a lot of fault tolerance here in the failover clustering. Now, it is best for fault tolerance and also really good for database servers. Okay, I want you to kind of keep that in mind as you start to get into a higher level of IT infrastructure. Network load balancing, it can work for databases, but you're probably going to get better results with failover clustering, okay? Now let me tell you about this third one, which is kind of a variant of the first one, terminal services load balancing. Now this is going to require at least two machines with terminal services configuration. Load balancing, all it does is just redirect terminal services requests to the server that's less busy, okay? Now, I need you to understand that all three of these options are going to require you to have duplicate machines with the same configuration, okay? That's really important for you to remember and keep in mind. You can't really do network load balancing with one server, okay? You can't have a failover cluster with one server. You have to have at least two, and they need to be in the same configuration. Fortunately, I'm going to show you how to create duplicate machines, though. So you can set up one machine and then take an image of that machine and then duplicate it, redeploy it as many times as you need to for as many machines as you have, and then easily set up these three methods of high availability, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and break these down visually. Now, network load balancing and terminal services load balancing pretty much operate on the same principle here, okay? Basically, we have multiple servers. They're separate servers, okay? They're all set up in the same configuration. So all three of these servers in our little picture here all have terminal services running on them. And then as requests come in from clients, whichever server is the least busy gets that particular request. Now, a lot of times we'll use what we call round robin DNS, right? Round robin DNS basically circulates the request to the different servers. Now, terminal services load balancing, while it works on the same premise, the application of it is just a little bit different. And once we get into the demonstration section of this video, I'll actually show you the two different places where we'll go to install each, although we'll only be installing terminal services load balancing and we'll be using the TS Session Broker, which I spoke to you briefly earlier of. We'll show you that and how to get that guy installed. Now let me talk to you about clustering now, okay? In this instance we have database servers. Now clusters, basically we have multiple machines acting like one machine. And if one machine goes down, let's say this guy goes down, not that big a deal because we have two other machines in our picture here operating as a failover cluster. So the other two machines pick up the slack and they simply pick up where the other machine left off. It's really great for fault tolerance, and if you have a particular application that really needs high availability, like databases, this might be the best go. So there's differences in the situations that you would use each one of these. But again, your web stuff is probably going to be best. Your terminal services stuff is going to be best used for. It's going to be best suited for network load balancing, where you have separate servers. Whereas when you have really heavy-duty applications like databases, they're probably going to be better for failover clustering. Okay. All right. So now that I've described to you the big three, although I really only talked about two, right? However, TS load balancing really operates on the same principle here. Let's go ahead and let's talk now about how to build and deploy a deployment services image to create duplicate machines so you can do network load balancing, you can do clustering. If you have terminal services like what we have, we can do terminal services load balancing. Here's the deal. We already have our TS machine built, right? So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using deployment services, which we've already built earlier in this video too, right? We're going to use it to capture an image of that TS machine, and then we're going to deploy it. Basically make a duplicate copy of that machine onto another virtual machine. It's going to take less effort on your part. Now, it may not necessarily take less time because when you're using deployment services, depending upon your level of network traffic and everything else, it does take a little bit of time to deploy these. But especially if you've done a lot of heavy-duty configuration, this really might be a good method to save you some time. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to create a capture image. Okay? We're going to be creating a capture image over on our deployment services server, which we set up earlier. We haven't really been back to it lately, so we're going to go back to it. We're going to create a capture image using one of the boot images that we've already installed. We're going to use this capture image to grab the image on TS1. So once we have the capture image created, then we need to bounce back on over to TS1, and we need to use a utility called sysprep. Now, if you're familiar with Server 2003 or maybe even 2000, sysprep has been around a long time. It's a lot easier to use though now. And so we're going to run sysprep to basically clean up the operating system and make it as clean as possible, because when we go to deploy the server again, when we go to create a duplicate machine, we're going to need a new machine name, a new GUID for it. We're going to need a new security identifier for it. And sysprep basically takes the operating system, cleans it up, generalizes it so that we can grab it as an image. Okay, basically just cleans it up so we can reuse it as many times as we want. Now here's the thing. We create what we call a reference machine first, and that is what TS1 is going to become. It's going to become our reference machine because we already have installed Microsoft Office on it. We've already installed TS Remote App on it and all that good stuff, all right? So all of that stuff is going to come over with the image, right? We won't have to reinstall Microsoft Office on our new machine that we're going to be using for using network load balancing on these two machines, because remember, we want to make sure that we have as high availability for our server as possible, or for our particular service. All right, then after we have done the sysprep, we're going to capture the image by rebooting TS1. We're going to use the capture image that we created to boot up with. All right, it's very similar to what we did with deployment services earlier in this series. It's a piece of cake. Then after the capture is complete, we can deploy that machine again using deployment services like we normally would. We'll show you how to do that as well. Now, I want to make sure that there's a really important thing I need you to remember, okay? Once you've used sysprep on a machine, you are going to have to do one of two things on it, okay? First of all, you might need to use the new image to redeploy the machine. This is probably what you're going to need to do if you are using physical servers, right? So if you have two physical boxes that you want to use network load balancing with, you're going to need to essentially reinstall it. Okay, that's really the only way to describe it. Or if you're using Hyper-V like we are, we can just go back to a snapshot. Okay, and you are making snapshots, right? When you're using Hyper-V, snapshots are going to save you massive amounts of time, and I cannot stress this enough. Right before you do something really squirrely to a server, you want to test something out, do it in Hyper-V and make sure that you are taking snapshots so you can revert back to a previous state of that server. Okay? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to bounce back on over to our Hyper-V machine, which is where all of our stuff is living at, right? We're going to start the process to create a duplicate of TS1 using Windows Deployment Services. After we have our duplicate machine, and remember, we're creating a separate terminal services server. Then we're going to use terminal services load balancing through TS Session Broker to create a highly available solution that should also respond well when users need to get to that Office-based reporting software that Hank is so hot on, okay? So that's our plan. We're using terminal services load balancing to make Hank's wishes come true, because as IT people, that's what we do, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and bounce on over to that Hyper-V server and let's get this party started. All right, so we're over here on the Hyper-V machine, as you can see. And here is our Windows deployment server, and here's TS1 running in separate windows. We're going to first create that capture image so we can grab the stuff off of TS1 and save it as an image so we can create a duplicate machine. Let's go ahead and go into WDS server here, and we're going to go into our Windows Deployment Services server and deploy one.globo. Now what we need to do is we need to go to the boot images, okay, in order to create this new capture image. Now our capture image needs to match the architecture of the operating system that we're about to capture. All right, so we're going to grab a hold of our 64-bit Longhorn setup. I'm going to right click and select create capture boot image. Now you might initially say, what's this discover boot image? Well, let me tell you just a second about discover images. If you have an older machine that has an older network card in it that is not PXE enabled, and it's probably going to be a fairly old machine, probably 4 or 5 years old at the very least, but if you have a machine that you want to utilize deployment services with, you might need to create a discover boot image so you can utilize deployment services with non-PXE based network cards. Okay, now remember that a PXE based network card, all it really allows you to do is boot up from the network. Okay, all right, so we're going to create a capture boot image because all of our machines are PXE enabled. That's an advantage to using Hyper-V. All right, so we're going to name this image name, we're going to call this Grab It. Okay, and so we're going to put in an image description. This image is for, let's say, creating images of 64-bit server. 2K8. All right, so now we need to tell it where we're going to put this Grab It image. So we're going to click on Browse. And this is pretty basic stuff here. We're going to go to the remote install folder here first. You see we have the boot stuff. Let's go. We can go ahead and we can put it in the boot, or we can put it in images. It doesn't really make too much of a difference where we put it. I'll go ahead and I'll put it in the Server 2008 64-bit. Here's the install.wims, and I'm going to go ahead and leave the file name as grabit.wim. That'll be fine. Now it says open. It's kind of a misnomer, okay? So don't get thrown off by that, because really what we're doing is we're telling it where to place the image at, okay? So even though I'm clicking on open, you might want to think of this button more as create. Not sure what's up with that, but regardless, this is where our image is going to go live. All right, now I just simply tell it next, and it's going to sit here and spin for a while. Basically what it's going to be doing is it's going to take the boot image and it's going to extract an image and make modifications to it so that boot image can be utilized to both boot up the machine and capture the image of the operating system and all the fun stuff that's on that particular hard drive, wherever we decide to use this at. And by the way, once you create one capture image for one architecture, you can pretty much use it for everything, just so you know. You don't have to create a whole bunch of capture images. You do need to have one for your 64-bit and one for your 32-bit if you're going to be using 32-bit operating systems as well. Okay. All right, this guy's kind of going slow, so I'm going to pause the video, and as soon as this guy's done, I'll be right back. All right, so the operation has been completed. The image was created successfully. Now we tell it finish. And now we look at the boot images, and hey, it's not there. Okay. Well, there's one more step to this process, and it's kind of a pain in the neck, but we got to do it. All right, so let's go ahead and right-click and select Add Boot Image. And now we browse for the location where our grabit.wim lives. Here it is. I'm going to select it and tell it next. And I could rename it here if I wanted for the deployment window, for the deployment interface. I don't really feel a need to do that. Let's go and tell it next, and away it goes. Now, it shouldn't take a huge amount of time because all it really needs to do is add in the image into the interface here so that it is usable. And there we go. Okay, now we're going to tell it to finish. And now our new Grabit image is now available for us to use to boot up a machine using our network boot sequence. So we've actually seen this before, but instead of using one of these other two images we've set up and created earlier, we're going to use this guy when we boot up our TS1 machine. Okay? All right, so this one is taken care of. Let's go ahead and minimize the WDS server here. And let's go back over to TS1. All right, so let's go ahead and maximize TS1 here. And what we need to do before we do too much with this is we need to run sysprep on this particular machine to clean it all up, to make sure that the operating system and all of the whiz-bangs we've installed will come over cleanly after we redeploy it as a duplicate machine. All right, so let's go ahead and let's do that here real quick. We just go to the Start menu, and we just have to type in sysprep. That's the easiest way to find it. Now, one quick note, if you try to reboot your machine without running sysprep, you will not be able to capture the volume that sysprep actually does its thing on, okay? So just keep that in mind. Unless sysprep is run, Windows Deployment Services, when you reboot using that Grabit image that we just created, it's not going to play nice with you, okay? Let's go ahead and run sysprep, and this is really easy, okay? There's really only two options here, out-of-the-box experience and system audit mode. But out-of-the-box experience, basically what it does is it strips out the name of the machine, the security identifier, the GUID, all of the unique identification of this machine so we can use it elsewhere. We also want to make sure we put a check mark here in Generalize to help further that. And now we have some shutdown options. We can quit, reboot, or shut down. Well, we're going to select Reboot. Now, this sequence of events that we're about to do, I want you to pay special close attention to, because this particular sequence that I'm about to perform will make things really super easy for you if you follow it to the letter, okay? So, step one, run sysprep. Specify out-of-the-box experience and Generalize, and then reboot. We're going to tell it OK, and sysprep is going to sit here and spin for just a little bit while it actually does a cleanup, quote-unquote, by stripping out, again, the name of the machine, the unique identifiers, and all that good stuff. But I want to remind you that it is going to keep all of the roles that you installed, all of the software that you installed, and will even keep it joined to the domain, okay? So depending upon how your Active Directory domain controller is feeling during that day, you shouldn't have to rejoin it when you create duplicate machines. It should just go ahead and join to the domain automatically. I can't give you a 100% guarantee on that, though, just so you know, okay? So if you have to go back and rejoin the machine to the domain, don't cuss at me, because sometimes weird things happen with Active Directory. All right, now just a quick note here. I'm actually going to be editing some time out here because it's going to take a little while, but I want you to see as close to as naturally as can be what it would look like to run sysprep and then immediately reboot and go into the Windows Deployment Services capture mode. Looks like I don't have to cut any time out at all. We got some pretty fast action here on that. So it's getting ready to reboot right now. Hey, there we go. And now as soon as it reboots, this machine, TS1, remember how we set it up as a virtual machine earlier. We set it up so that it will boot off of the network. Now, the network boot that's going to be utilizing is, of course, the WDS server, and we're going to use the Grabit image rather than one of the other images that we use, because remember that Grabit image is what is going to allow us to capture everything on this volume. But if you don't run sysprep, I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but I really want to drive this home to you. If you don't run sysprep, you will not be able to capture the volume. It won't even let you select a drive, and you'll be sad. Okay, remember, my job is not to make you sad, right? Okay, so here we go. We're grabbing a DHCP. We're going to hit F12 here on the keyboard, and we should boot into the network. Hey, there we go. That was fast. So remember that whenever you're in the Pixie boot, you have to use the keyboard, right? So I'm going to use the keyboard and go down to the Grabit image and select that and hit the enter key, and it should boot up into the Windows deployment environment. But it does look like it's taking its own sweet little time here. Now, the nice thing about the Windows Capture deployment environment is that it is semi-GUI. It's very similar to what you would see if you were installing it clean, and also similar to what you would see if you're doing a regular deployment. However, we are going to have some options that are going to be a little bit different than a regular deployment. We're going to have to specify which volume, which drive we want to capture. We're also going to need to tell it where to save the image to, and if we want to actually allow it to upload the image back to the WDS server. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to press the enter key to go to next. And now I'm going to use the arrow keys here to select the only volume that I have on this one, C. And then here for our image name, I'm going to type TS server, and we'll just put in here NLB for network load balancing. And you know what? I really should take out that space in there. Spaces are bad things whenever we're doing work like this at a kind of a lower level. All right, image description here. This was going to be an image for creating multiple TS servers in order to use TS load balancing. I'm going to press the tab key to move to the next and hit the enter key. All right, now name and location. Now here's the thing, okay? I'm going to press in the enter key, and I need to go to the computer here. Of course, I seem to be pressing the tab key a little too much there. Okay, that's some good key punching there, coach. Okay, now I'm pressing the enter key to select computer, and I'm going to go to the local disk C because, well, that's the only one we got. Of course, we have the boot X, and that's not the one we want, so it only has 33 megabytes. So we're going to go ahead and put the actual image on the C drive, okay? So here's what's going to happen. Our deployment server image that we're using is actually going to take the contents of the C drive, create an image of them, and put them on the C drive itself, okay? I want you to understand that that's where it's initially going to live. So I'm going to press the tab key here. We're going to go to file type here. We're going to call this, let's call this TS image, and then save as type. We don't have to worry about that. Pressing the tab key again and pressing the enter key to save. Now I need to press the tab key to move down here to this upload image to WDS server here, and press the space bar to put a check mark on it. And now the server name. Tell you what, real quick, since we're in the virtual environment, let's go ahead and minimize TS1. Let's go back and let's just remember what our actual server name is. It's deploy1-globo. Okay, let's go ahead and let's make sure that we get that correct. So deploy1, whoops, there we go, -globo. Now let's press the tab key and see if we can connect by hitting the enter key. And by the way, if this doesn't work, then I might actually need to put in the fully qualified domain name, deploy1-globo.globomantics.com. Oh, no, looks like we did okay. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and use my SuperCoach administrator credentials. And we'll press the enter key. Oops, looks like we need to try that one more time. Let's try globomantics/SuperCoach. There we go. So don't forget that you need to include your domain name. Pressing the enter key. Ah, okay, that seemed to connect. I'm going to press the tab key once more, And here are the image group names that we have created earlier. Okay, here's the Server 2008 64-bit edition. That's what I want. I'm going to press the Tab key and hit the Finish button. And now it's going to sit here and spin for a very lengthy amount of time. When I mean lengthy, I'm not kidding. It is going to take the entire hard drive and capture it to a file. So obviously, this could actually take up to a few hours. All right, so I'm going to be pausing the video here and then coming back after the image has been captured, which again, it's going to take a while. As you can see here, we're actually at 0%. Yeah, it's going to be a big file. So, all right, so I'll come back as soon as that wraps up, and I'll take you to the next step, okay? All right, so you see here that our image capture is 100% complete. We're going to go ahead and press the Enter key to close. And now it's going to go ahead and reboot. We'll wait for just a second here, and we'll see what it's going to do next. We might be at a point where we're probably going to be safe to go ahead and revert back over to our previous configuration using the snapshots. So let's go ahead and let's go back on over to our WDS server, and let's see where we're at with the install images. We should be seeing them here in the Server 2008 group. Let's hit F5. Let's see if they're showing up yet. Nope, not quite. Let's see if we can add the install image by right-clicking and see where he is. Here is our TS image that we created. So we'll go ahead and we'll double-click and we'll tell it next. And here is the information that we put in earlier for it. That's fine. We'll tell it next and next. And now we're going to add in the image. So we should now be able to utilize this image that we grabbed from our TS box. We'll finish that guy up. We should be able to now use this in order to deploy another server. So in order to deploy another server, what we need to do is we need to create another server. All right. So let's go ahead and do that here. Let's create a new Hyper-V machine. So we'll go over here to Actions and we'll click on New Virtual Machine. And of course, it'll take just a little bit for it to do its thing here. We're going to name this machine TS2. And we're going to go ahead and store our virtual machine at that same G folder that we've been storing all the rest of them at. Remember, I highly recommend that you put your virtual machines in a separate drive if you can, just in case the operating system decides to freak out, okay? All right, so we'll go ahead and tell it next. We'll leave it at 512 megabytes. Let's go ahead and specify the virtual network. We'll tell it next. We'll leave the defaults for the virtual hard disk here as well. And we'll tell it next. Now, we're going to be installing an operating system, once again, from a network-based installation server. So we're going to go ahead and select that one. I know this is all old hat, right? I mean, we've seen this stuff already. And we will tell it to finish. It's going to go ahead and configure all that stuff that we just set up. And remember, it is going to be booting up from the network, so we need to hit the F12 button in order to bring it up into that network boot sequence, okay? So don't forget about that. And it's coming, should be coming up here in just a moment. And it looks like our server managers are kind of freaking out there. Come on here now. Come on, TS2, let's go. All right, looks like we do have it and it is running. Let's go ahead and see if we can open up to it with a double click. At this point, I'm probably pushing the 4 gigs of memory that I have on this machine pretty hard. That's okay. All in the name of science, right? All in the name of science and good learning. In all reality, what I really should do is I should probably upgrade this machine. Looks like we got a boot failure here. Let's go ahead and let's reset the machine here real quick. And that's what we wanted to see. What we're going to do here, we're going to go ahead and hit the F12 key. And we're going to load up that image that we just created. There we go. Okay, now which operating system are we going to use? I really should say which boot image are we going to use. We're going to be using the Windows Longhorn setup because our image is 64 bits. Let me go ahead. I'm going to maximize this guy here so we can see a little bit more. All right, scrolling down, Windows is loading files. Here's our IP address that we've grabbed from the DHCP server. And as soon as this thing loads up into the screens, we'll go ahead and we'll just walk through the wizard real quick. And, you know, again, at this point, I mean, this is old hat. I mean, there's really not much to this. All we need to do is we need to make sure that we select the appropriate image for our Terminal Services duplicate machine. Tell you what, while this guy's loading up, let's jump on over here back over to TS1. Let's see what it's doing. All right, you see it's rebooted, and you see it's back in the setup windows. That's not really what we want to do. We don't want to reset this guy up. So tell you what, let's go ahead and let's minimize this guy down, and let's take TS1, and let's go ahead and let's roll this guy back to the previous position right after we did video 8. So I'm going to right click on after video 8, snapshot, and I'm going to click on apply. And what that's going to do is it's going to revert the machine back to the state where I created the snapshot. Now what I could do is I could take another snapshot and then apply. That's not really going to do me any good. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit apply. Then you see that the machine is actually going to stop, turn off, and then reboot, and then go back to this particular state in our snapshot continuum here. All right, back over to TS2 now, and we're back here in the Windows Deployment Services wizard. Let's go ahead and press the tab key a couple times and go to next and press the enter key. And now I need to log in once again here as Globomantics/Supercoach, and we'll put in the password, hit the enter key, and now what we get to do is get to select the appropriate image, and it looks like somehow I seem to ended up with 2 entries in the database. Not sure how that happened, so we might want to go back and take a look at that a little later on. I'm going to go ahead and select TS Server NLB and press the enter key here to go to the next. And now where do I want to install Windows? Well, I only have one disk right now, so I'm going to go ahead and press the tab key and tell it next. And now we just sit back and wait. So I'm going to pause the video right now while this guy does its installation thing. Hey, you know what? Before we do that, let's go back to TS1 real quick. Okay, there we go. TS1 is back to the full status where we left off at when we took the snapshot. So everything is looking A-OK here. We'll come back to this machine when we get ready to do our load balancing setup. But for right now, we're just going to sit back and wait for TS2 to load up, and we'll check the configuration, make sure everything is copacetic there, and then we'll move on to that load balancing technique. All right, so here we are on TS2, and you see that we are at the install screen. So we're going to go ahead, and once again, I still have not yet installed the integration services yet because, well, the operating system hasn't been installed. So I'm going to go ahead and use the keyboard and hit the next key here, and we would normally put in a product key, but for right now we're not going to do that. Do remember that if you do not put in the product key, you get a trial period, but then after the trial period expires, then it gets very angry with you. All right, and you can always put in the activation key later on, you know that. So let's go ahead and tab down and hit the space bar to accept the license terms. And next, again, this is nothing big except for here. This is different, isn't it? We have to put in our computer name. All right, so we're going to put in TS2 for our computer name here. Because remember, when we ran sysprep, what we ended up doing is we actually stripped out the computer name. Okay, so remember that. You will have to put in the computer name when you create these duplicate machines. In a normal IT infrastructure, you should already have your nomenclature, your naming scheme already laid out so you know exactly what you're going to be calling each one of these machines. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hit start by pressing the enter key and wait for just a little bit here while it thinks about what it's going to do next. All right, hey, there we go. Okay, so we booted all the way up, and it's a pretty fast install there. So let's go ahead and let's hit the Control-Alt-Delete button here. Now, the question is, who do we log in as? So tell you what, let's go ahead and let's try to log in here using Globomantics/Supercoach. And we'll put in the password. Nope, that one didn't work. All right, so well, we may actually end up having to join this guy back to the domain, looks like. So we're going to put in the local administrator password that we actually used on the very first machine. Okay, so on TS1 I used a generic password that I use on pretty much all the stuff. So when you reboot back in, you're probably going to have to use the local administrator. All right, let's go ahead and we'll maximize this guy. There we go. And let's see, when we click, do we get that messy little mouse is not captured in the remote desktop session? No. And here's why. Your integration services were installed on TS1, right? Everything that you had installed on your reference computer, in our case TS1, comes over in the image. So when we redeploy that image, we get all the bells and whistles and toys that we put into that original reference machine. All right, here we go. TS2 is up and alive at the least. Let's see what we actually did end up with in terms of installed software and whatnot. Make sure our server roles are intact. Oh, here you see that Terminal Services licensing mode is not configured. Okay, well that does mean that Terminal Services is installed, so that's good. And you see that Terminal Services will stop working in 100 days. So you actually get, 120 days, I think, or something like that, in order to actually install or put in the license for it. And after 120 days, it gets very angry. We try to keep the licensing as happy as we can. We always good to stay legal and all that good stuff. All right, looks like it is downloading and installing updates here. That's going to maybe make a little bit of a delay here for stuff. Let's go ahead and let's open up Server Manager since it doesn't seem to be coming up by itself right now. Oh, hey, there's our ICT. That's what I was looking for. All right, so let's take a look through here through our ICT. Well, in just a second, we'll also take a look at the Server Manager as well. And it does take a little bit for it to load up and figure out what actually is on itself. All right, so let's see what we got. Oh, there's a Server Manager. Let's go back to ICT. It's a little easier to see here. We need to go back and we need to reapply the time zone. You'll notice here that the networking has not been retained, because it's one of those things that did get stripped out when we did do the sysprep. All right, so to go back and reset just a few things here. Where do we need to go? We need to go to Eastern time, right? So this guy's still going to be in New York. All right, good enough. And we should probably go in and configure our IP address here. Let's go ahead and let's do that. So we are going to have to come back in here, do a few basic items and a few basic changes, because for all intents and purposes, it really is a brand new machine. It's really what, remember how I was telling you about the OOB thing, out of the box experience? When we create these duplicate machines, while the server roles and all that good stuff are retained, the specific identifying information on the machine has been stripped out. So we got to go back in and just do a couple of quick things that you would normally do for any brand new machine. No big surprise here. We're going to uncheck IP version 6 unless you're using IP version 6. Let's go ahead and let's put in a new IP address. You know what? Let's see what the IP address is for TS1 real quick. I don't quite remember which one I put in there, so always a good idea to go back and check. We're going to try to give these guys IP addresses as close as we can. And in the Server Manager, it tells me here that I'm 192.168.5.1.16. So I tell you what, let's go back over here to TS2 and let's make sure we hit the number lock key. Make sure that's turned on. We'll do 168.5.17. We'll try to keep those as close together as we can. Just more so for convenience. There's no real technical solid reason to make them right next to each other, except that it just kind of makes sense, right? So let's go ahead and we'll set that. So we don't have any duplicate IP addresses. And of course, again, in a regular IT infrastructure, we should already have all that stuff mapped out. We should really know what we're going to be doing with that to begin with. All right, so let's close that out. Let's set the IP address. Let's see, is there anything else that we really need to wrestle? Let's scroll down here just a second and let's see here. In the add roles section, you see we have terminal services, web server. All right, so it looks like all that stuff came around. Let's go ahead and close out of the ICT and let's go in into the Server Manager. And let's take a look at the roles in here. Here's my network policy and access server, terminal services. Let's go into that. That's really what we're really interested in. Okay, well, let's go into the TS Remote App Manager and let's see if all that is the same as what we did have on TS1. Just double check here real quick. Nothing really that specific, nothing that critical. Of course, we could have taken it on faith that everything came on over okay. All right, here's Excel and Word. All right, so we do have basically a duplicate machine, so we're in good shape. So now what we need to do is we need to, on one of these machines, install TS Session Broker in order to manage the load balancing so that when one of the machines is busy, the other machine will pick up the slack. All right, so I'm going to go over here on TS1. Could we put it on either? Yeah, sure. The only thing that I want you to remember is that your terminal services broker must be a member of the domain. If we go back over here to TS2, I'm sorry, I'm kind of bouncing here a little bit, but you'll notice here that it does say that we are part of the GlobaMantics work group. I couldn't log in with my SuperCoach credentials, and that makes me a little concerned. So we might still have to go back and attach this guy to the work group or to the domain. But we'll worry about that a little bit later here. Let's go back to TS1 and let's get that TS Session Broker installed so we can get that set up. Session Broker, again, must be installed on a member of the domain. All right, so we know that TS1 is a member of the domain. Full computer name ts1.globamantics.com, domain globamantics.com. Yeah, we need to go back over and make sure that this stuff matches on TS2 because obviously right now it's a work group, right? This says domain, and over on TS2 it says work group. Yeah, that didn't quite take. So again, when we were talking about that whole sysprep thing, it does strip out that unique identifying information. So after we get Session Broker set up, or at least installed, on this particular machine because it's already a member of the domain, then we'll go back over, we'll get that other guy joined to the domain so we can make sure we get all that good domain stuff in here. Let's go ahead, we're going to add a role service in here. We're going to make sure we're on terminal services, of course. Let's add this role services. TS Session Broker is currently not installed. Let's go ahead and let's install it here real quick. And notice that, setting up, network load balancing for this kind of stuff, and all of it's been very, very wizardized. Okay? There's not a huge level of work that we need to do to really wrestle this. You'll notice here that though underneath TS Session Broker, add the computer accounts for the terminal servers in the farm to the session directory computer's local group on this server. Configure TS Session Broker settings on each terminal server on the farm. Okay, we'll need to do that. And there's some more information. So we've got some links in here that we could click on if we want to, kind of get front loaded on this stuff. Let's go. Let's just get it installed first, and then we'll go back and we'll worry about the configuration. Now, while this is installing, let's go ahead and let's bounce back on over to TS2 because this guy still is in the workgroup configuration, right? So that's not what we want. Let's go ahead and change the system properties, and let's get this guy joined to the domain proper. So our domain here, we'll put it in globamantics.com. How about that, huh? There we go. That's what we were looking for. All right, let's go. Let's use Computer Coach or SuperCoach. And see if we can't get this bad boy joined up to the domain. Once this guy is actually in the domain, oh, there we go. It'll also have a computer account in the Active Directory database, and so we'll be able to do all the goodness that we need to accomplish for TS Session Broker. Well, let's go ahead. Let's have this guy restart. I'll close this. Restart now. And let's go back on over to TS1. Let's see how this guy's doing. Oh, looks like he's still installing. So tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video while this TS Session Broker is installing and that other machine is rebooting. And as soon as both of those tasks are done, I'll come back and start recording again. All right, so you see that Session Broker has installed over here. So let's go ahead and let's close this window. And let's see if a restart is in order for this one. Some of our role services and whatnot, sometimes they will ask us to restart. Looks like we're okay for not having to restart for that. So before we jump into this, let's go over and let's check TS2 here real quick. Let's make sure this guy has rebooted A-OK. And let's go ahead and let's just log into him real fast. And we're just going to do a Control-Alt-Delete here. And now that TS2 is now part of GlobaMantics, the domain, and not just the work group, we can go ahead and log in as SuperCoach. All right, so we'll get that guy up and live. We'll minimize him while we go back over here to TS1. All right, so what our next step is to really utilize that Session Broker that we just installed. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here a little bit. Just double check here. Session Broker is installed. When we select it, you'll notice here that a TS Session Broker link becomes available. Same thing with Gateway and Web Access. When you select these items in Server Manager, the nice thing about it is that this will actually open up the help screen for that particular feature. And now one of the reasons why I'm bringing you to this is that I want to make sure that you know how to utilize the fantastic documentation for this, right? Because, I mean, let's face it, are you going to remember everything about this whenever you go to configure your own server? No, probably not. But you'll at least have a recollection of it, and then going back and reviewing the help documentation will also assist with that too. All right, now I want to point out here to you the checklist to create a load balanced terminal server farm by using TS Session Broker. Okay, let's select that guy. Now, here's the magic formula for just about everything in IT, which is find the documentation and follow the instructions. All right, so let's go through here. Let's take a look through our task list. First of all, we installed the Session Broker. Check, got that. Here's a link that also was in that initial screen that I kind of skipped through because I knew I could always come back and get to this link later on. But our next step in the process is to add each terminal server in the farm to the Session Directory Computers local group. All right, so here's what we need to do. We need to take TS1 and TS2 and make them members of a local group called Session Directory Computers so that this machine knows which machines are part of what we're creating a farm. Okay, now a farm basically is at least 2 machines that are cooperating, if you will. All right, so let's go ahead, let's do this here real quick. Let's go to the Start menu. We're going to go to Administrative Tools, and we're going to go to Computer Management. We're going to go in here. We're going to tell our local server here that we want TS1 and TS2 to be recognized as terminal servers. Let's go ahead and let's open up Session Directory Computers, and we see we have nobody. So let's go ahead and click on Add, and let's put in here TS1. Oh, you know what? It's only looking for users and groups. Let's not do that. Let's cancel that. Object types. We need to include computers in here and uncheck groups and users, so we don't care about that. All right, so we'll put in TS1, check the name. Hey, there we go. Tell that guy okay. Let's add TS2 here too real quick. Oh, looks like I didn't get that set up right either. Making sure that computers is check marked here is a vital element to making sure that if we're looking to add a computer account, that our server knows to look for a computer account, not a user and group. All right, let's check this again. Hey, there we go. Okay, so don't make that mistake. All right. All right, so we have added our we have added our computers to this particular group. Now let's go back to our task list. That's a check. And now we need to configure a terminal server to join a farm in TS Session Broker. Okay. In order to do that, we need to go back over here to our Server Manager. And we're going to find this set of tools for our Session Broker here underneath Terminal Services Configuration. Let's go ahead and select this guy. And here underneath the Edit Settings section, right? Down here you see where it says Member Farm and TS Session Broker. It says no. Well, we need to correct that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to double click right on this particular item. Doesn't look like a link. I know. It's kind of a weird thing. It doesn't look like a link, but it really is. And it's really the way to get to your Session Broker element. We're going to be joining a farm in TS Session Broker. And now we need to put in their TS Session Broker server name or IP address. Okay, so we're going to put in here TS1. And now we need to decide what is our farm name going to be. Could it be Farm 1? You know, let's call it Globo Farm. Let's call it Globo TS Farm. How about that? Okay. Now, participate in Session Broker load balancing. Oh, here's where that TS load balancing comes into play. Let's put a check mark in there. Relative weight of this server in the farm. Now, your relative weight is basically which machine has precedence. Okay, and if you want to leave this alone, that's fine. Use IP address redirection recommended. Clear this checkbox only if your load balancer supports the use of TS Session Broker router tokens. Now, if you want to learn more about routing tokens, you can go ahead and select that. We're not going to worry about that. We're going to use the recommended settings. It's probably going to be okay. Select IP addresses to be used for reconnection. Well, remember that TS Session Broker, in addition to handling that load balancing thing we were talking about, also allows you to reconnect to disconnected sessions. All right, so let's go ahead and put a check mark here in this guy, and we'll tell it okay. Oh, but you know what? Before we do that, you remember how I was telling you about licensing? Okay, this is a place where you can also go to configure your licensing here as well. You can do per device or per user, and then you can also utilize specific license servers. Now, we're not worried about that at this stage in the game, mostly because Hank hasn't ponied up for TS licenses yet. So we're going to go back over to TS Session Broker, and we will tell it OK. All right, so we are now a member of a Farming TS Session Broker. This is a good start. Now, we're going to do the same thing over on TS2. So let's go ahead and minimize TS1, and TS2 is going to come up here. That looks like we got logged out of that one. Let's go ahead and log back into him here real quick. And maximize for full exposure. Let's close the ICT. We're good for that. And we will go into our server manager. And we'll go into the roles section here. And we will also set up our TS Session Broker item in our farm. We're going to add this guy to the farm now. And into Terminal Services. And right back here to Terminal Services Configuration. Oh, look, Terminal Services Licensing Mode is not configured. Yes, okay, that's fine. All right, so let's go into Terminal Services Configuration. I know I keep, kind of canceling out of the licensing thing, but one of the elements of that is that you're going to have to work with a Microsoft representative to figure out what your licensing is going to be and how that's going to be handled. So, all right, so member of Farm and TS Session Broker. No. Okay, let's open this guy up. And let's go ahead and let's join a farm in TS Session Broker. And so now we need to put in our TS1 machine again, okay, because that is the Session Broker server name. Now you notice that I did not install TS Session Broker on TS2, did I? I only installed it on TS1. You only need it on one Terminal Services server. What we're doing here is we're telling it, hey, this is where our Session Broker server is. Now, your farm name is pretty important. You need to make sure that you are using the same farm name all throughout, okay? So if you have 2, 4, or 5 machines you're going to be using for this network load balancing technique, the farm name has to be the same. All right, participate in Session Broker load balancing. That's what we want to do. And again, we can leave this as it is. It's not going to hurt anything. But let's say you have a server that is more powerful in your farm. Let's say you have one machine that has 4 gig of RAM and you have one machine that has 8 gig of RAM. Maybe you want that 8 gig of RAM machine to handle most of the requests. Well, then you can actually increase the weight of the server in the farm. So you can increase it just to 101, and that would actually put it up to the top. Or if you want to put it up to 200, depending upon the machines that you do have. Now, these machines are both virtual machines. They have equal amounts of RAM, so leaving them at 100 both is going to be A-OK. All right, use IP address redirection, OK, and select IP addresses to be used for reconnection. All right, let's go ahead and make sure we specify 17 and just make sure that's checkmarked, and we're going to tell it OK. All right, so now our TS2 machine is now part of the farm. All right, so everything is A-OK. We still haven't really done anything with that licensing thing yet. And again, that's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with per occasion that you encounter it. And you're going to, again, have to work with Microsoft on how you want to license it and the dollars and all that good stuff. All right, so we've gotten this machine part of the Terminal Services farm now. Let's go back to TS1 and let's go back and let's check on our checklist. And let's see how we're doing with that, huh? All right, back here on TS1, and let's open up our checklist. It is kind of nice that Microsoft provides this right in the documentation. All right, so this one is check. Now, configure DNS for TS Session Broker load balancing. All right, remember how I mentioned to you earlier, back when we were doing the slides, that we utilize DNS round robin, basically bouncing from server to server, but we have to set that up in the domain name servers. So what we're going to do is go ahead and do that real quick. And by the way, let's just go ahead and I'll open up the link just so you can see the directions here real quick. It's really simple stuff. Basically, we go into DNS for our DNS server. And by the way, our DNS server is actually our domain controller. So I'm going to bounce you over to the domain controller here in just a second. And we're going to configure this particular item. But what we're going to do is we're going to create new host records or A records. And in the name, we're going to specify the terminal server farm name, okay, not the server name. Okay, we're not going to be putting in TS1 or TS2. We're going to put in the farm name. Why? Because that's a virtual name that clients will use to connect to the terminal server farm. We're not going to be using the name of an existing server, all right? And then we simply add the IP address of the terminal server, all right? Remember how I was pretty specific about the IP addresses that I use, 16 and 17? Well, this is why, okay? It's really nothing more than hedonistic convenience on my part. At the end of the day, our entry is going to look something similar to this. We're only going to have two records, two host records, and it's going to be 192.168.5.16 and 192.168.5.17. And instead of farm1, we're going to be using global TS farm for our particular host name, okay? So now that we know what to do, let's go ahead and let's bounce on over to our domain controller where our main DNS lives at, and let's go ahead and get this configured, okay? All right, so I'm over here on DC1, as you see, and what I'm going to be doing is we're going to go into the DNS server section here and open up DNS, open up NYDC1, and we need to go to forward lookup zones, okay? Let's go ahead and open up forward lookup zones, and let's go ahead and let's go into the globalmantics.com section. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to right click. I'm going to make a new host record here. And now for the name, I'm going to be using, again, Globo TS Farm. All right, I'm going to be using that for each one of my records. Now the first IP address is the IP address of TS1, which is 192.168.5.16. We can go ahead and create pointer records if we want to. We can also allow any authenticated user. Let's not do that. Let's not mess with those. We're going to add that particular host. Okay. Now let's do the same thing again. Globo TS Farm. And now the IP address, which is going to be the IP address of TS2. Okay. 192.168.5.17 this time. So we're actually going to have two DNS records that are going to be both pointing to Globo TS Farm, but we're actually going to be utilizing both servers. All right, so let's go ahead and let's add the host. All right, that one was also successfully created. We'll tell it done. So we have added our records to IP addresses pointing to the same farm. Let's go on over to back to our TS1 server. Let's see how we're doing on the checklist. All right, so back over here on TS1, here is our next set of items. Let's just double check here. By default, DNS round robin is enabled when using DNS on a Windows Server 2008 based domain controller. The enable round robin setting is available on the advanced tab when you view the properties of the server on the DNS. Tell you what, let's go over, let's double check, and let's just make sure that that is actually true. Okay, we try not to leave too much to chance. So let's go back on over there. Let's double check that. If we are A-OK, then we are going to go ahead and see if our new farm actually does work. All right, back over here on DC1, just a quick check. Let's right-click on NYDC1 here, and let's go into its properties, and let's see if round robin is actually set up here. In the advanced tabs where I'm at in the DC1 2K8 properties, and oh yeah, we're good. Enable round robin is already enabled, so our DNS records we've set up are still going to go ahead and work with that whole load balancing TS session broker to distribute requests between our two servers. All right, so everything is looking really good. Now let's see if our Globo TS Farm actually does work. All right, so we're over here on a Vista machine, a Vista client here. I'm logged in as Jay Patel, just as we have before. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to a slightly different address to test this. We're going to go to http://globotsfarm.globalmantics.com. So when you create a farm name, what you need to do is you need to now tell your users, if they're going to be using web access or whatever it is going to be, that they need to use the Globo TS Farm rather than just TS1 or TS2. Now, they still can use TS1 or TS2, but I mean, here's the thing. You won't get the whole load balancing thing, all right? So we also need to include our TS. So I mean, it's pretty much identical except that we're using this farm name that we created in Session Broker. Okay, let's go ahead and press the Enter key. And hey, looky there. All right, TS Web Access worked A-OK, and we now have access. Now, do I know which server I'm on, either TS1 or TS2? No. Does the user care which one that they're on? No. But now both machines can operate in tandem to share the load, and whichever machine is not busy, especially if you're using that relative weight set to be equal, both of them at 100 or 200, whatever it may be, whichever machine is not busy at that moment, or at least less busy, will accept and handle that terminal services request. All right? Wow, did we cram in a whole lot of stuff in here or what? Now, I know that there's a lot of steps, and so this is probably going to be a video that you'll want to go back over at least once more. Because, I mean, there are a lot of little bitty things that we need to do with TS Session Broker. Now, the good news is that, as I showed you, you do have access to that really nice checklist that Microsoft has provided. Of course, I walked us through that just so you know where to go for it, because, again, you know, 6 months down the line, are you going to remember everything in this class? Probably not, but you will remember to go to that documentation and go through that checklist one at a time. That's the magic formula for a lot of the stuff in Windows servers. Follow the directions, okay? All right, let's go back to our slides and let's wrap this show up. All right, so critical vocabulary, and I know you had just been waiting for this. So here we go. We got a lot of stuff. Network load balancing, using multiple servers with similar configuration to share the load by alternating which server handles requests. Failover clustering, using multiple servers with similar configuration to provide highly available services in case of a machine failure. Remember that a failover cluster basically allows one machine to die, but the service still remains available to users. And we're going to see that also when we do our media server. We're going to create a failover cluster for our media server as well. TS load balancing, network load balancing with TS servers using TS Session Broker, and I'm showing you how to do that. Capture image, all right, a capture image is a separate image file used for capturing an image of a hard drive. It's really easy to create, right? You just have to go into your boot images, right-click on the appropriate architecture item, and create capture boot. A reference computer is a computer that is all set up with everything, all the configurations, software applications, and whiz-bangs needed for multiple machines, and then is captured via deployment services. And TS Session Broker, a role service used for TS load balancing and for reconnecting users to disconnected sessions. All right, after watching this video, you should be able to describe the big three of highly available services. You should be able to run sysprep on Server 2008 before creating a capture image. Remember, that's really important if you're going to be creating a capture image. And also, don't forget to create snapshots if you're running Hyper-V. Otherwise, if you're running this on a physical machine, you're really going to have to redeploy that machine. Then you're going to create a capture image of a reference computer. Use deployment services to install a captured image and really create duplicate machines, right? Install TS Session Broker and configure load balancing for terminal services. Now, I walked you through those steps, and there's a whole lot of them in there, I know. But you saw that, I mean, none of them are that hard either. You know, I mean, it's just about knowing where to go. All right, well, we have wrapped up this pretty intense video. Let's go ahead and let's move on to the next one. We're going to start talking about Windows Media Server.